a good one, everybody.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, roll it.
Attention.
Live from the Veritex Community Bank Studios, you're entering the Wheelhouse.
Come on, admit it. You're glad to see us.
On ESPN 97.5 and 92.5.
A little ear hole action, get my blood boiling a little bit.
Featuring Jake Asman.
Positive vibes here, positive vibes.
Cody Stoots.
Lifelong Houstonian.
And Brad Kellner.
There's a chance I bet on it.
Now, it's showtime.
And here we go on a Monday Wheelhouse. You're listening to ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. It is Monday, January 9th, 2023, as we get things rolling here at the start of another Wheelhouse radio program. Jake Asman, Cody Stoots, BK, Brad Kellner, and producer Andrew Carlson as we take you until 7 o'clock. A whole lot to talk about on this January the 9th. Obviously tonight in sports, the national title game, and we will mention that at some point. But today's show will be all about what has transpired with the Houston Texans over the last 24 hours. Even as we're speaking, there's more breaking news. The Texans have already put in several requests to speak with some candidates. By now, everyone knows the story. Lovie Smith, after blowing the number 1 pick yesterday in Indianapolis, got off a plane last night. And I was told the Texans landed around 7:45 p.m., and by 9 p.m., we knew Lovie Smith was already out of a job. So the Texans wasted no time firing Lovie, making him one and done. David Culley, one and done. Lovie Smith, one and done. And Cody Stoots, for now the third time in 3 years, Nick Caserio is about to hire his third head coach.
Yeah, the Houston Texans take another swing at that. They released the statement that Cal McNair and Nick Caserio will work together on hiring the next coach. Nick Caserio released his own statement about Lovie Smith and said, where the organization wants to go, and I'm paraphrasing, Lovie Smith essentially couldn't take them there. And we saw this over the course of the season, and we knew this was the likely outcome from about mid-season, especially when this team, which had, in a lot of our opinions, more talent than last year and in a better situation than last year, was set to win less games than the David Culley coach team. And Lovie Smith, if you believe some of the reports, is very set in his ways, very old school. There wasn't a lot of flexibility to what Lovie brings to the table. But even if there was no salvaging where this team was headed if Lovie Smith continued to be the head coach. The Texans make that decision. They move on. And thank goodness it wasn't a week or so. You know, it took, 4 days after the end of the season last year. It didn't even take 4 hours, really, it felt like, after the end of the season this year before Lovie Smith and the decision was made. And I do wonder if this decision was made independent of whatever happened on Sunday. Like, this decision between Cal McNair and Nick Caserio was made in a meeting between them Friday, Saturday, before the game even got played on Sunday, and just the speed at which it was executed was moved up based on the result yesterday.
I think the decision was made well before yesterday's game. I think that's why you started to see a bunch of reports last week indicating that the Texans were going to evaluate the future of Lovie Smith after the conclusion of that game against the Colts. Those reports don't come out unless the coach is getting fired. And the Texans put it out there that they were going to move in a different direction from Lovie Smith, and Lovie Smith decided to give the Texans one final parting gift on his way out, and that parting gift was the middle finger, because that's basically what the Texans and Texans fans got yesterday by winning that game in Indianapolis. And it felt like, I know I'm about to get fired, so I'm going to find a way to screw over my boss one final time. And that's what seemingly happened yesterday with Lovie Smith, the way he coached that game, and also his decision to go for 2 in the final minute, which was so different from what we saw from Lovie over the first 17 weeks of the season. I think he knew he was on his way out because the decision was already made pre-kickoff yesterday, and he wanted to find a way to screw over his boss and his employer one last time, and ultimately he did that.
And I have no issue with what Lovie Smith did. If I was in his spot, I knew I was done, and he knew he was done going into that game. I would have done the same thing. To me, this is an organizational failure. It starts at the top with Cal McNair, but also Nick Caserio, I think, should lose a lot of faith in his ability to just be like a smart general manager if you're a Texan fan. I mean, that was just downright moronic to allow that to happen. Like, for Caserio to, one, allow Brandon Cooks to play in this game after he quit on the team earlier this season. You stripped him of the captaincy, and then he, basically threatened to, air dirty laundry about the team publicly on Twitter. For, Brandon Cooks to even be out there is an absolute joke. And then you see what the Bears are doing. They obviously value the number 1 pick. They sit down Justin Fields. They're playing Tim Boyle and Nate Peterman because they realize, hey, we could lose and get the first pick. And even if it ends up not costing the Texans, if they end up with the quarterback, let's say they want all along, now there's a great unknown on what's going to happen between now and draft night. Let's say the Texans do love one of these quarterbacks. Well, now you got to hope to God that the Bears don't trade back and a team moves up in front of Houston to take the guy you want. So Nick Caserio, he always talks about like control what you can control. Well, the Texans could have controlled the entire draft if they just went out there and tanked properly like Chicago did. So the fact of the matter is, I've never been the biggest Caserio guy, but now he's about to hire his third coach in 3 years, and he lost them the number one pick in the draft. Like, that to me is a terrible look by this general manager.
Yeah, they could have sat Brandon Cooks and still maybe accidentally won that football game. It just felt like there was a lot of chance that they left it up to, and they didn't maximize their opportunity, or I guess minimize the chance that they could win that football game in a super impressive fashion. I don't think you guys understand this. They made history yesterday. Like it was a historic moment yesterday. No team had converted a 4th and 20+ on the season. 20+ The Texans did it. No team had converted 2 4th downs of longer than 10 yards in the same drive this season. The Texans did it. They made history on the way to getting the number 2 overall picks. Like, just the incredible bad luck that existed for people that wanted the number 1 pick, the good luck that existed for Lovie Smith and company. And look, Lovie Smith's probably finishing his head coaching career and maybe his coaching career with a victory. Well, what does he care about the number 1 pick? He doesn't coach him. A lot of his guys that he brought in aren't coaching it. He doesn't care. The guys that were active, Lovie Smith, they wanted to win, and they made history on their way to winning. Like, it was a historic achievement by an offense that had been inept the entire season, and the general manager. And yes, I know you cannot, I know that the players are going to play, and they're playing for a contract, and did you expect those players to go out there and stink? No, I didn't. But if 20 or 30 snaps in the last game of the season is making the difference on a player's career, he wasn't that good to begin with, so spare me that part of the argument. But the head coach going for 2, that's a clear F you to the GM and the owner. That the head coach, when he played for a tie in week 1.
Against that same team.
And 17 weeks later, Lovie Smith goes for 2. And by the way, that entire drive was operated like he was trying to win or lose the football game on that drive. Because he used a timeout. He used a timeout to draw up the play for 4th and 12, which would have kept them from being able to stop the clock and get the ball back if they hadn't converted. So that entire drive was about sticking it to the people that are about to fire him, not being a team guy. And 7 years ago, I think exactly is the number, Lovie Smith was all on board about losing the game on purpose. He was subbing in a bunch of backups against Sean Payton and the Saints at the end of the season to make sure that team got the number 1 pick. But you know what? Lovie Smith was going to coach that guy. So the fact that you had a guy that was for sure done at the end of the year, it screwed you in the draft order.
And ultimately, this goes back to Caserio hiring Lovie Smith in the first place. Because he chose to fire David Culley after 1 year. David Culley could have gone out there and you would have the same exact record this year, or roughly the same, if you brought David Culley back. But you felt like you needed to move off of Culley and said that your goal was to be better this year. So you bring in Lovie Smith, which never made any sense. And at the time, we were just relieved it wasn't Josh McCown. But this was the only franchise that was going to give Lovie Smith the opportunity to be a head coach for the 3rd time. So because they hired Lovie Smith, and Lovie Smith doesn't give a damn about the first pick, he knows he's not going to be here in Houston next season. He went and won the game. It was the ultimate FU. And the fact that the Texans actually won that game is just remarkable. I mean, you talked about the 4th and 20, but Davis Mills had been abysmal in the 4th quarter all year. Now he's leading a huge comeback. He's executing on the 2-point conversion. Everything about the end of that game was so Texans it hurts.
Yeah, everything we had been complaining about with Lovie Smith all season long, well, he did what we wanted yesterday when we didn't want it. All the things we've been complaining about Davis Mills all season long. Well, on that final drive when we didn't want him to look like a franchise quarterback, he went out there and looked like Patrick freaking Mahomes on that final drive yesterday. That's all it was, man. I mean, stuff we have been complaining about with this team all season long. We were hoping it did show up in weeks 1 through 17, and it didn't. We were hoping it didn't show up yesterday, and unfortunately it did, and it cost the Texans the number 1 pick.
And look, the Indianapolis Colts stink to high heaven right now. That's a bad football team this year. They're in a bad spot. They're in a weird spot as an organization. So you could have gone out there and played without Brandon Cooks in the lineup, and you still might have won that football game. You could have gone out there and played with, say, Frank Ross as the interim head coach because you fired Lovie Smith a couple of weeks ago, and you still could have accidentally won that football game.
But you could have told Frank Ross, hey, here's how I want you to handle it so you could lose this game. Because Frank Ross, there might be a chance, Cody, he's back on the team next year.
That's what I'm saying. Is you could have still won that football game and lost the draft pick that you desired. But you didn't go about maximizing your chance to lose from the general manager's chair. Okay?
Yeah.
Lovie Smith wasn't about maximizing the chance to lose. John Grenard, finally healthy, finally showing up for this team, wasn't about maximizing to lose. Chris Moore damn near making one of the most impressive in-zone catches I've seen. Brandon Cook showing up. Those guys aren't about maximizing to lose. But the GM from his chair didn't maximize the chances of them losing that game. And now it could still work out in the Texans' favor, but for 108 more days as we wait for the NFL draft to start, every time an insider tweets, there's that little tinge of worry that it's going to be somebody's jumped in front of you.
Yep.
And it's going to get the player that you want in the NFL draft that you could have selected with no questions asked if you just lost the football game yesterday.
Kind of felt like an FU from Davis Mills, too. He knows all the chatter about what the Texans are going to do at his position this offseason.
How about FU from Brandon Cooks, who's gone and said as much today when he spoke to the media?
Where was the Rex Burkhead check down on 4th and 12 or 4th and 20?
What do you
How many big 3rd and 4th down plays has Davis Mills checked it down to Rex Burkhead instead of throwing it deep down the field to actually try to convert the first down? How many times did we complain about that this year? And on the final drive, that's when he decides to make plays like that. It's brutal. And you're right, Cody. It's going to be a long 108 days. And I'll be honest, I think the Bears would be idiots to not trade that pick. There are so many quarterback-desperate teams out there, and there are 3 or 4 really good, potentially top 10 quarterbacks in this year's draft class. There is a lot of reason to believe that a number of teams are going to reach out to the Bears and are going to be willing to pay a king's ransom to try to get that number 1 overall pick right there. So you want the ball in your court, and the Texans gave it away yesterday by winning a completely meaningless football game.
Cody and I were talking about this last night on Cody's YouTube channel. You know, a lot of Texans fans have said, well, if they really want a quarterback so bad, why don't they just call the Bears and trade a pick and just move up and get the first pick, and it's fine. Not so fast. Not easy to do that. Remember, when the Niners traded the number 2 pick with the Bears, they went from 2 to 3 in 2017. That was the year the Bears moved up 1 spot to take Mitch Trubisky. They had to give up a ton to make that deal. They traded a 3rd rounder and a 4th rounder that year and a 3rd rounder the following year. So they ended up trading 3 pretty solid picks, 2 thirds and a 4th to move up 1 spot. And this was in 2017. So now we're talking about moving up from 2 to 1. If that's what the Texans want to do, it's such an unnecessary thing they might be forced to have to consider when they could have just easily lost this game and controlled the entire draft.
And there were no bidders for that number 2 spot. Nobody else was trying to get it. You may have 4, 5, 6 different teams trying to get that number 1 spot.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a full-on bidding war amongst teams to try to get to number 1. And the Houston Texans, unless they win the bidding war, are going to sit there at number 2 and hope that their player doesn't come off the board at 1-1 when Roger Goodell goes out there and announces.
No question. And we'll talk more about this coming up. But the idea that the Bears are definitely not taking a quarterback, I keep hearing that from some Texans fans. They have Justin Fields. The talk in Chicago today as well, this regime didn't draft Justin Fields. What if they fall in love with Bryce Young or they fall in love with C.J. Stroud, whoever the top consensus guy is? Does that mean they could take the quarterback and then all of a sudden you don't get your guy and then the Bears could simply just trade Justin Fields? So the idea that, it's all going to work out in the end, maybe that's true. But the whole point is the Texans could have controlled the entire draft, and instead they allowed Lovie Smith to send one final FU on his way out the door. A lot to talk about here. We'll get back to the Lovie conversation in a moment, but the Texans, unlike last year, are moving quickly. They've already requested the following candidates so far to speak with them about their head coach opening. Eagles offensive coordinator Shane Steichen. Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon. Gannon, a finalist, of course, last year. Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. 49ers defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans, and there's some doubt whether or not DeMeco will want this job, but at least they put the request in. And then Broncos defensive coordinator Edro Evero. So far we're up to 5 names that the Texans have already requested to speak with.
All young guys. No old guys in this one. If you remember, there were a lot of old guys in the very first coaching cycle.
You want the age of each guy?
Jim Caldwell was an old guy. Leslie Frazier was an old guy. They ended up with an old guy in David Culley. They interviewed some old guys last year. They interviewed some young guys last year, and they interviewed some guys that didn't have any damn business being interviewed last year.
Yeah, they interviewed and ended up with a bald guy with a white beard last season. It was the opposite of young.
So we can go through the ages of these guys here in just a second, but requesting these 5 guys to talk to them, and hopefully you get to talk to all 5 of these guys, but requesting these 5 guys, you're already off to a better start than last year's coach search.
Well, it shows you're being serious about your search this year. It shows that maybe Caserio realizes, I better get this right and find my long-term guy. Otherwise, I'm not the one who's going to be making the hire the next time we have an opening. Steichen's 37, Gannon's 40, Johnson's 36, D'Amico is 38, Evero's 42. So they're all young guys. This is where the NFL's going, and the Texans have requested 5 of the top names so far.
You're right, Jake. Nick Caserio has to get this right, and this also has to be a long-term plan. Okay? When David Culley was hired, we knew he wasn't the long-term plan for the Texans at head coach. When Lovie Smith was hired, we knew he wasn't the long-term plan for the Texans at head coach. And I know those guys got multi-year contracts, but you can't just give a guy a one-year deal. Like, you have to give them multiple-year contracts to make it look like you're trying to operate like a real football team. But this is not revisionist history here. When David Culley was hired, people felt that way. When Lovie Smith was hired, people felt that way. Those guys were not the long-term answer at head coach. Nick Caserio can't do that again. This cannot be another one-and-done or even a two-and-done type of hire. This coach has to at least get through Nick Caserio's remaining contract. He's got 4 years left on the 6-year deal that he signed when he took over as this team's GM a couple of years ago. This next head coach needs to be here for at least 4 years. This has to be the long-term answer, and going with a young guy obviously makes a lot of sense. A young guy, so he can build his brand with you, and obviously he can spearhead this rebuild, and he can be a part of things while your team is rebuilding, but also while your team is competitive a couple of years down the road as well.
Man, I love this list, mostly because you've got a wide range of guys who dealt with a wide range of talent on their team. Every single one of these guys calls plays for their side of the ball. You know, Johnson and Steichen call the plays for their offenses. Gannon, Ryans, and Evero call the plays for their defenses. All of them have had really good success this year, and all of them are pretty fast risers in their career as well. You know, Nick Caserio was a fast riser in what he did and how he moved through the New England Patriots organization. I mean, the guy went from, like, working on Wall Street or, you know, being a day trader to one of the key figures of the Patriots in less than a decade. So, you know, he respects a fast riser, and he respects guys that can make their way in a quick manner. And Jake listed the ages of these guys and the success they've had. This is a very impressive list. And I got a hunch that they're not done. I don't think this is it from what they're going to request and maybe talk to. I mean, they talked to a bunch of guys the first time. They talked to a bunch of guys last year. I would think that there's maybe 2-3 more names they're going to talk to.
Let me ask you this. So they obviously, you know, I was about to say they lost yesterday because it certainly felt like it. They won yesterday by losing the top pick in the draft. Do you have any more doubt than you did previously on Caserio's ability to get this right after something like that happens yesterday?
If you're taking a swing from this crew, okay, like, I mean, I'm fine with almost any of these guys. Like I have preferences I can power rank within there. I just don't do something stupid with the head coaching job, like hiring a guy that you never even interviewed, which is what happened last year, or hiring a guy that's never been a coordinator and never called plays like you did the year before. Just don't do something stupid at the head coach spot. You don't need to be thinking outside the box, okay? Act like other NFL franchises at this point and hire one of the top coordinators and just let it be what happens. Like, let it play out. Let's see what happens. Operate like somebody else. This whole this you know, galaxy brain stuff that Nick Caserio's done before, it hadn't worked. So adjust, adapt, change.
What's your expression, Cody? Get you some top? Is that the expression?
Shop at the top.
Shop at the top.
Shop at the top.
Not get you some top?
Well, I mean, you know, you can get that from time to time too.
Okay.
But for the Texans, it's shop at the top.
Shop at the top.
It's a family show. My goodness.
I was just curious. I couldn't remember what
Like a
Cody
top
said.
hat? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, top
I think
anything.
you'd look good in a top hat.
You think so?
Yeah.
Where can I get one of those?
The hat store.
Yes, dumb question. Good answer. This coaching search should be different. They should be shopping at the top because this job is way more appealing than it was in either of the last 2 seasons. The biggest thing is there's no more Deshaun Watson drama, guys. And that's the big one. You've got more draft capital because, let's not forget, the Watson trade was made after Lovie was hired. So the Texans head coach last year, when he took the job, he didn't know what the draft capital was going to be. He didn't know that there'd be multiple first-round picks in 3 straight seasons. There's more cap space for this team. I think the Texans are top 5 in terms of cap space going into this offseason. There's more talent on this roster. And, oh, by the way, the bald creep, Jack Easterby, is gone. Like, they should be able to shop at the top and attract a good long-term candidate. So, Jake, to answer your question, honestly, yesterday was very disappointing. And I had some doubt about Nick Caserio because of the way he handled Week 18. I do think that should be considered an indictment on GM Nick Caserio and also the owner, Cal McNair, for not finding a way to guarantee the Texans lose yesterday. But there's a lot here for this job, and we talked about it last week, you can make a strong argument that this Texans vacancy is the most attractive vacancy out there for any head coaching candidate. They should be able to get somebody who excites this fan base way more than David Culley did and way more than Lovie Smith did too.
It's just such a missed opportunity not being able to have the number one pick.
It is.
I feel like this is an attractive job. We went through it. You have the draft capital, more salary cap space. The division's not very good, so you could turn it around quickly if you do it right. But how much more attractive would it be if you're talking about having the number one pick in the draft on top of all that? And yeah, obviously number 2 is not terrible, but if you have the number one pick, it stands out. You're going to get more coverage. You're going to get more praise. But there's going to be more interest from the fan base. It's just the whole morale of the fan base could have been lifted if they just lost that game yesterday. And instead, we're sitting here hoping and praying, well, the Bears don't take the guy you want, or team doesn't move up in front of you and takes the guy you want. Like, imagine this team right now, first pick in the draft, and they have some of these names that they want to request to talk to. I think the fan base would be in a spot it has not been in a very long time, because morale was as low as I've seen it from the Texan fan yesterday after how things played out at the end of that game.
It was the most ticked off Texans fans have been since DeAndre Hopkins was traded for peanuts. To me, just following this team, they were ticked off about that, and they were ticked off that the Texans won the football game yesterday, cost them the number 1 overall pick. I don't know that you lose out on a candidate necessarily because you're now at number 2 versus number 1. Now, if Chicago was looking for a coach, maybe you do lose out on a candidate, but Chicago's not looking for a coach. They got year 2 of Matt Eberflus on deck, and that's what they're going to deal with. And you get to find out about your guy right away, because for 3 months plus, the head coach will be the face of the franchise. And then with the number 2 overall pick, you're drafting the face of the franchise. With the first selection that you make in the NFL draft, that's the new face of the franchise. But for 3+ months, that coach gets to kind of set the tone, gets to excite the fan base, gets to try to get them to buy in, gets his eye. So you'll start finding out about your guy and how he can connect with your fans and handle the situation that you've put him in right away. Because it'd be a little easier to do all of that if you had 1-1. You don't. So, hey, for 3 months, let's see what you got. Let's see what the opening press conference when they hire this guy looks like. Let's see what when he's making the interview rounds, what it sounds like, what it looks like. Let's see. You get an opportunity to prove yourself right away and kind of connect with this fan base and get them to buy in on you, and then they can start buying in on that team that you're going to put together and that face of the franchise you're going to draft in the 2023 draft.
And make your fans buy back in with the decisions you make, not with the burgers you flip or with the beards you trim, right? I mean, this whole PR stunt bit by the Texans last year, it was all in an effort to get fans engaged. Okay, congratulations. Where did it get you? You didn't make enough good decisions with your coaching staff. You didn't make enough good decisions with your personnel. Make decisions this offseason on the field that are going to help get this fan base invested again. Yesterday was not. I mean, they're a Texans fan. I was yelling at my TV more than I've ever yelled at my TV during a Texans game. My roommate's a diehard Texans fan, has been since day one. He was losing his freaking mind. I mean, check Twitter. Any Texans fan you talk to, they're pissed with the way yesterday went down. There have been so many days in the recent years where Texans fans have been pissed and embarrassed to be a Texans fan. Do things this offseason that excites and rejuvenates this fan base and has people excited to be rooting for this team again this season. If you haven't done that the last couple of years, find a way to get it done this off.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, hit the like button down below, and of course, subscribe to my channel. And if you're a Houston sports fan, listen to ESPN Houston 97.5 FM or 92.5 FM weekdays from 3 to 7 every afternoon.